"Get out! I said get out!" The words cracked across the marble floor like a hammer, pulling every eye in the lobby toward the counter. The bank manager leaned forward, face red, finger stabbing toward the doors. His voice echoed against polished stone, sharp enough to rattle the pen cup on the counter. At the center of it all stood an old man. One hand rested on a cane, the other clutched a leather folder worn soft at the edges. A paper slipped free, drifting down to the floor, its inked lines catching the light before settling near his shoe. No one bent to help. No one spoke. A teller whispered, "He's back again," while a man in line shook his head, muttering under his breath. The old man bent slowly, knees cracking, and retrieved the page with deliberate care. He tucked it neatly back into the folder, aligning the corners with the precision of habit. The manager slammed his palm against the counter. "We're not here to babysit you." The veteran's grip tightened on the cane, but his voice remained steady. "I only came to ask about my pension deposit." Across the lobby, a boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why's nobody helping him?" She hushed him, though her eyes lingered. And near the entrance, a man in a dark suit set down his coffee, his gaze fixed on the scene. Someone else was watching. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Samuel Keating had been walking into this branch for over 20 years, always on the same Tuesday of the month, always at the same hour, as if his life had been tuned to the rhythm of a second hand long ago, and he never allowed it to falter. He carried with him a leather folder the color of worn mahogany, its corners darkened from decades of touch. His late wife Louise had given it to him on their 40th anniversary, saying it would keep his papers in order the way she had kept the house in order. He had laughed then, kissed her knuckles, and promised he would use it every day until his hands were too stiff to open it. He kept that promise. Inside were careful stacks, his pension slips, deposit receipts, a photocopy of his discharge papers from the United States Army. He kept a pencil tucked into the fold, worn down to half its size, sharpened with a pocket knife until its wood was smooth as bone. Every month, after speaking with a teller, he would step back to the small writing desk near the entrance and balance his figures in neat, square print. The act was ritual, not necessity. He trusted numbers the way a mechanic trusts the feel of a wrench, something concrete when the rest of life had softened. Today, however, the numbers did not add up. The pension deposit, regular as sunrise, was missing. He had checked twice before leaving his house. The slip of paper confirmed it. He folded it carefully, tucked it inside the folder, and walked the 4 blocks with his cane tapping the rhythm of his steps. The summer heat pressed against his back, but he kept his pace steady. When he reached the counter, his voice had been quiet, almost apologetic. "I believe there is a mistake," he said, sliding the slip across the polished surface. The deposit from the Department of the Treasury did not arrive this month. His tone had not wavered. His words were exact, trimmed of anything unnecessary, like the reports he had once filed under kerosene lamps in temporary barracks. But to the manager, it had been as though he had asked for the world itself. The man's face flushed, his jaw set, and the words came sharp. "Get out." The words that had split the room open, leaving Sam in their center. Now, after the echo of that command still lingered, Sam stood straighter, the leather folder pressed close to his chest. He had not moved to leave. He would not give them that. His dignity was the only armor left, and he would wear it without complaint. The tellers exchanged glances, their whispers carrying. A woman in line shifted her weight impatiently. The security guard tapped his radio once, as though waiting for a signal. Sam adjusted his stance, the tip of his cane clicking softly against the marble. His eyes, pale blue and sharpened by years, did not waver. He had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than shouting. It was not weakness to wait. It was discipline. And though his body was 82 years old, that lesson still lived in every breath he took. Sam Keating, machinist by trade, widower by time, veteran by blood and oath, stood in the middle of a bank that had decided he was no longer worth the minutes he was asking for. But today would not end the way it began. Today, something would be different. Sam adjusted the folder in his hands, making sure the corners of the papers inside were aligned. It was an unconscious habit, a way to impose order when the world refused to give it. His thumb pressed along the leather's edge, tracing the groove that time had carved. The manager had turned away now, muttering to a teller, but his anger still burned in the room like smoke after a fire. Sam cleared his throat once, polite but firm, and tried again. "I've come on this day every month for years," he said, his voice carrying the patience of someone used to repeating instructions. "The pension check was missing. I only need to know why." Before he could finish, the manager's hand shot up, silencing him without a word. "You've asked already," the man said sharply. "You'll have to call the helpline. This counter is for real transactions." Behind the glass, one teller leaned to another and whispered, her lips barely moving, "He's back again." The words floated across the room. Sam heard them. He didn't react. A man waiting near the velvet rope smirked, shaking his head. "Probably forgot his password," he muttered. Too low for the staff, but just loud enough for those nearby. The small laugh that followed was dry, dismissive, cruel in its indifference. Sam shifted slightly, setting his cane against the counter edge for balance. He reached down to gather a paper that had slipped in his folder. His knees cracked like old timber. The sound drew glances, but no hands extended to help. He steadied himself, lifted the page, and slid it back into its place with deliberate precision. The boy by the magazine rack watched intently, his small brow furrowed as though trying to understand why no one offered kindness. His mother's hand held him back from moving forward, but she did not stop his gaze. Sam straightened, placing both hands flat on the folder as if it were a map laid before him. His tone remained calm, almost gentle. "Mistakes happen. I only need the deposit confirmed." The manager leaned back, arms crossed. "Sir, you are holding up the line." No one spoke for him. No one stepped forward. The weight of silence pressed harder than the insult itself. Sam's hand tightened briefly on the folder, veins rising against his skin, but his face did not harden. His discipline held. He turned slightly, glancing at the line of customers. Their eyes slid away like fish scattering under a stone. The security guard shifted his weight, hand brushing his radio, his lips pressed thin. Sam bent once more, retrieving his cane. The rubber tip tapped against the marble as he lifted it, the sound echoing faintly, steady as a metronome. He leaned on it, straightening again with slow determination. "Thank you for your time," he said, though no thanks was owed. His voice carried no bitterness, only the even cadence of a man refusing to be shaken from dignity. A paper rustled behind him as someone tore a ticket from the dispenser. The red slip curled in the air, the sound sharp in the silence. No one else moved. Sam turned back to face the counter one last time, his pale eyes clear, his jaw set. He had been dismissed, ignored, treated like an inconvenience, and yet his presence lingered, quiet but unyielding. No one stood. Yet. The air in the lobby thickened, heavy with tension no one wanted to acknowledge. Sam remained at the counter, his cane planted firmly against the polished marble, his folder clutched in both hands. His voice had been quiet, even respectful, but the silence that followed it was broken not by understanding, but by anger. The bank manager slammed his palm flat on the counter. The sound cracked through the room like a whip, rattling the cup of pens until one tipped and rolled across the surface. His face flushed red as he leaned forward, words spitting between clenched teeth. "I said leave. Now." The vibration of that command ran through the floor tiles, up into Sam's shoes. He did not step back. His body did not flinch. The only movement was the faint tightening of his knuckles around the folder, the veins in his hands rising against thin skin. Around him, the room responded in the quiet cowardice of bystanders. A woman in line shifted, muttering to the man beside her, "Why doesn't he just go?" The man shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. A teller behind the glass whispered nervously, her gaze darting to the security guard. Sam drew a breath, slow and steady. "Sir," he said, his tone level, "I only came to ask about what is mine. Nothing more." But the manager's face darkened further. He leaned in so close that the smell of his cologne carried across the counter, sharp and artificial, stinging the air. "You're holding up paying customers. If you don't leave this second, I'll have you escorted out." His fist struck the counter again for emphasis. "Out!" The security guard moved now, stepping away from his stool. His boot struck the floor with heavy authority as he closed the distance, one hand resting on the black strap of his radio. He stopped just behind Sam, his shadow falling over the old man's shoulders. "Sir," the guard said, his voice clipped and official, "we're going to have to ask you to leave. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Sam did not turn. His eyes stayed on the counter. "I have no intention of making trouble," he answered quietly. "Only of being treated fairly." A voice rose from the line, a younger man, perhaps in his 30s, his cap pulled low. "Come on, just give him his check, man. He's bleeding time here." His words carried a ripple of courage, but it ended quickly. The manager's glare snapped toward him, and the man's voice withered into silence. He looked down, ashamed. Sam bent slightly, adjusting the folder in his arms, squaring the edges of the papers once more. The tremor in his left hand betrayed the weight of the moment, but his face remained calm, his jaw set like stone. The boy with the backpack tugged again at his mother's sleeve. "Why are they yelling at him?" The mother pressed a finger to her lips, shaking her head, her eyes darting nervously toward the counter. The manager straightened now, his chest heaving, his voice filling the entire lobby. "This is your last chance, old man. Walk out that door, or I'll have security drag you." The room froze under the threat. The customers shifted uneasily, some glancing at Sam, others looking anywhere but at him. The tellers behind the glass moved papers nervously, as though shuffling work could hide their shame. And through it all, Samuel Keating stood, his cane rooted to the marble, his folder held tight against his chest. His eyes were steady, pale and unbroken. The years had not softened them. He said nothing more. And still, the old soldier didn't flinch. The silence that followed the manager's outburst was a silence of shame. It filled the lobby, thicker than the hum of fluorescent lights, heavier than the whir of the ticket machine spitting out another number. Customers shifted their weight, their shoes squeaking against polished stone. But no one spoke. No one dared. Samuel Keating did not lower his eyes. He did not shrink beneath the weight of the insult hurled at him. Instead, he shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders, and carefully placed the leather folder on the counter before him. His fingers smoothed over its surface once, tracing the creases Louise's hands had once touched when she had wrapped it for him. The gesture was quiet, deliberate, almost ceremonial. He gathered the loose papers inside, aligning their corners until the stack was neat. Even here, with blood rushing hot to his temples and the threat of being manhandled from the room hanging over him, he chose order over disorder. He folded the strap of the folder into place, pressed it flat, and slid it close against his chest. His hands, spotted with age, moved with the precision of a soldier cleaning his rifle in the dim light of a barracks. He turned his gaze up at the manager, his voice calm and even, not raised, not pleading. "I only asked for what is mine." The words did not land as defiance. They landed as truth, simple and undeniable. The manager bristled, his lips parting as though to bark again, but for the first time, his eyes faltered. Something in Sam's steady tone cracked the armor of his authority. He pressed his lips thin, looking instead at the security guard who hovered behind the old man, waiting for a signal. Sam shifted slightly, the cane tapping once against the marble as he adjusted his balance. The sound echoed louder than it should have, a reminder that he stood by choice, not chance. His posture was not perfect. The years had bent him, curved his back, stiffened his joints. But in that moment, there was a straightness to him, an unmistakable echo of formation. Around the lobby, people felt it. The woman with the child lowered her eyes, ashamed of her silence. The young man who had spoken earlier clenched his jaw, regret simmering that he had let himself be silenced so quickly. Even the tellers behind the glass began to glance at each other, something uneasy settling over their practiced indifference. Sam's composure became a mirror. In his stillness, everyone else's restlessness grew louder. In his calm, their cruelty showed sharper. The boy with the backpack leaned forward in his chair, whispering again to his mother. "He's not scared." His voice was soft but carried, the innocence of it cutting through the stale air. And near the entrance, the man in the dark suit, who had been nothing more than another customer moments ago, set his untouched coffee on the marble ledge. His eyes, sharp beneath graying brows, lingered on Sam's steady figure. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, but his stillness was different from the others. It was the stillness of someone measuring, deciding. He hadn't planned to intervene, but then the insult had gone too far. The bank's lobby seemed frozen in that uneasy silence, broken only by the faint clicking of a teller's keyboard and the shifting weight of customers in line. The hum of the air conditioning pressed down, cool and sterile, but beneath it lay a current no one could name. Samuel Keating stood at the counter, cane rooted to the floor, folder pressed against his chest. A man made small by years, but not by dignity. Near the entrance, the man in the dark suit finally moved. His coffee cup, left untouched long enough for its warmth to fade, rested on the ledge by the door, a ring of condensation bleeding into the marble. He straightened his shoulders, the fabric of his jacket falling clean along his frame. His shoes clicked once against the stone as he stepped out from the shadow of the photographs that lined the wall. Images of ribbon cuttings and staged smiles, suddenly insignificant under the weight of what was unfolding. He walked forward, unhurried, but with purpose. His gait was smooth, unbent by hesitation, each step measured as though he were counting cadence only he could hear. His presence was subtle, but it carried with it something undeniable, an authority not shouted, but lived. The security guard noticed him first, his eyes flicking toward the approaching figure with a flicker of uncertainty. He straightened instinctively, as though recognizing a kind of bearing that commanded respect before words were spoken. The man in the suit stopped just short of the counter, his gaze shifting from the manager's clenched jaw to the veteran's calm face. He let the silence linger a beat longer, letting the weight of his presence settle into the room. Then his voice came low, steady, and clear. "What is the protocol?" he asked evenly, "when a decorated veteran requests assistance in this bank?" The question cut through the air more cleanly than the manager's shouts ever had. It was not loud, but it carried a sharpness that made every head turn. The tellers froze behind their glass, their hands stilling mid-motion. The mother by the magazine rack tightened her grip on her child's shoulder, sensing something had shifted. The manager blinked, his mouth opening, then closing again. This is not your concern, sir," he managed, though his tone had lost some of its venom. The man in the suit held his gaze, unflinching. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim leather wallet. He opened it with deliberate calm, turning it so the gold-embossed seal caught the cold light from above. The emblem of the United States Navy glimmered on the card within, framed by clean lettering. "Vice Admiral Richard Holbrook," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who never needed to repeat himself. "United States Navy, retired." He let the silence hang, then added with a weight that pressed into every corner of the room, "And I believe I asked you a question." The manager's face drained of color. His eyes darted toward the security guard, then back to the Admiral, as if searching for a shield that wasn't there. His voice, when it came, faltered. Protocol? I suppose we take care of it, Admiral." The Admiral did not blink. "You suppose?" The words landed like steel. Behind him, Samuel Keating shifted slightly, his pale eyes lifting to meet the figure now standing at his side. Recognition flickered there, not of the man himself, but of the bearing, the steadiness, the weight of authority earned through service. His lips tightened, then eased. For the first time since the shouting began, the old veteran's posture seemed lighter. Not because he needed saving, but because someone else had finally chosen to stand. The lobby, still hushed, felt as though it were holding its breath. The marble floor seemed to echo with every sound, amplifying the stillness that had settled over the bank. The tick of the wall clock, the shuffle of a receipt printer, the soft creak of the security guard's belt, all of it wove into a silence so taut it could snap. At the center stood Samuel Keating, cane rooted to the tile, folder held steady, the words I only asked for what is mine still lingering like smoke after a fire. Vice Admiral Richard Holbrook stepped closer, his shoes striking the stone with deliberate rhythm. He did not rush. Authority does not rush. His gaze swept the counter, pausing on the trembling hands of the teller, then the bank manager whose flushed cheeks had drained to gray. He stopped beside Sam, not in front of him, not overshadowing him, but shoulder to shoulder, forming a quiet wall of solidarity. The manager cleared his throat, his bluster collapsing beneath the weight of the moment. "Admiral, sir, this is simply a misunderstanding. The gentleman—" Holbrook raised one hand, not in anger, but in command. The gesture silenced the manager mid-sentence. His voice came calm, precise, and louder now, pitched not only for the manager, but for every ear in the lobby. "What is the protocol in this institution," he asked, "when a veteran of the United States Army presents his pension documents and requests assistance?" No one moved, no one answered. The words hung in the air like a charge waiting for lightning. The manager stammered, his tongue thick. "Admiral, sir, we treat all customers the same." "But do you?" Holbrook's tone was still even, but there was iron beneath it. His eyes did not blink. "Because I have watched this man stand here and be ridiculed, dismissed, threatened. He has waited with patience, with dignity, while you shouted at him as though he were a trespasser." The security guard shifted back a step, his radio hand falling to his side. The boy near the magazine rack leaned forward, his wide eyes locked on the Admiral, while his mother sat frozen, her fingers clutching the strap of her purse as if to anchor herself in the moment. Holbrook took one more step forward, his voice carrying further, steadier. "Samuel Keating," he said, glancing to the veteran, "served this country in uniform. He carried more weight in his youth than most men in this room will carry in their lifetimes. And now he stands here asking for nothing more than what is his." Sam's eyes lifted to the Admiral. His face, carved with years and silence, did not break, but the faintest flicker passed through him. A recognition, a gratitude too deep for words. The bank fell into utter stillness. The hum of lights, the tapping of shoes, the shuffle of papers, all seemed to stop, held at bay by the Admiral's words. Customers in line lowered their gazes. The tellers behind the glass sat frozen, their keyboards untouched. The bank manager swallowed, his throat dry. His lips parted, but no excuse came. He was cornered, not by threats or shouts, but by the undeniable weight of truth. In that instant, the entire room understood. The balance of power had shifted. No longer was Sam a man alone at the counter, cane in hand, folder pressed to his chest. He was not invisible, not dismissed. He stood now as he always had, a soldier holding his ground. And beside him, a Navy Admiral stood at attention without ever needing to snap his heels. The lobby itself seemed to bow in silence. The bank lobby had become a different place, transformed not by bricks or marble, but by silence. The kind of silence that was no longer indifference but reverence. All around, people shifted in their seats and along the velvet ropes, but no one spoke. They could feel it, the weight of something unspoken, older than the room, older even than the men at its center. Samuel Keating remained upright beside the counter, his cane steady beneath his hand, his folder clutched against his chest like a shield. His breath came slow but measured, each exhale deliberate. The years bent his shoulders, but his dignity straightened them again. The sting of insult still lingered, but it had not unseated him. He was still standing. Vice Admiral Richard Holbrook did not reach out to steady him. He did not lay a hand on his arm or speak words of comfort. He simply stood with him, shoulder to shoulder, his posture square, his jaw firm, his presence filling the lobby. He knew, as only those who had worn the weight of uniform could know, that respect was never given in pity. It was shared in silence. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the decades folded away. In that look was the quiet recognition of two men who had lived through storms few could imagine. Holbrook's gaze carried the steadiness of command, but beneath it was the memory of his own years in uniform, the nights when steel decks pitched under his boots and orders pressed heavier than the sea itself. Sam's gaze, pale and sharp, answered with the calm of a man who had carried burdens without asking to be noticed, who had built engines and held lines long after the cameras had gone. No words passed between them. None were needed. The boy by the magazine rack leaned forward, his voice a whisper to no one in particular. They know each other. His mother hushed him, but her eyes lingered on the two men, her lips pressed tight with something that looked like shame or awe. The security guard, who had moments ago stood ready to escort Sam out, shifted uneasily. He stepped back, lowering his gaze, his earlier authority evaporating in the face of something deeper, something he did not fully understand, but could not deny. The manager tried to regain his footing, his lips parting to speak, but his throat betrayed him. The words stuck. His jaw tightened, but his eyes fell away when Sam looked at him, as though the veteran's silence had grown louder than his own shouting ever could. And then Admiral Holbrook broke the stillness, his voice measured, calm, but pitched just loud enough for every ear to hear. "Tell me," he said, his gaze still locked on Sam, "what did the presses in Da Nang sound like when the generators kicked in?" The question struck the air like a match on dry stone. It was not a question anyone else could understand, not fully. But it was not for them. It was for Sam alone. A password spoken across decades. A challenge no imposter could answer. The lobby went utterly still. Even the printers at the telestations seemed to fall silent, as though the machines themselves leaned in to listen. Sam did not hesitate. His reply came at once, voice steady, carrying the rhythm of lived memory. "Like thunder under steel," he said. The whole earth shook with it. The words fell heavy, final, irrefutable. They belonged not to this polished bank, not to the marble floor or the humming lights, but to a world most of the people here had never seen, a world of heat, grit, and machines roaring under fire. And now, everyone in the room knew. Samuel Keating was no confused old man clutching papers. He was a veteran, a builder of engines, a keeper of silence, a man who had stood in places that left their mark forever. The recognition spread through the room like a tide. The laughter, the whispers, the impatience, all of it collapsed into silence, and not a soul could look away. The air inside the bank felt charged, alive with something larger than any of the men or women who filled its lobby. Customers who only moments ago had shuffled tickets and muttered complaints now stood rooted in place, their eyes pulled to the counter as if tethered there. The hum of fluorescent lights still filled the ceiling. The faint aroma of burnt coffee still clung to the air. Yet none of it seemed to matter. All that mattered were the words that had just been spoken and the silence that followed them. Like thunder under steel, the whole earth shook with it. Samuel Keating's voice had not cracked. It had not trembled. He had answered as if he were still there, as if the memory of the roaring presses, the heavy hum of generators, the vibration rattling through the soles of his boots had never left his body. For him, it hadn't. The sound lived in his bones, stitched into the fabric of who he was. Vice Admiral Holbrook held his gaze, nodding once, not as a prompt, not as encouragement, but as recognition. He knew the sound, too. He remembered walking those steel floors, the air thick with oil and sweat, the endless grind of engines that could not falter. And he remembered the men who had kept them running when everything else threatened to fail. Sam was one of them. The memory was no longer abstract. It had a face, a name, a presence standing right here in front of them all. The room shifted. The janitor who had earlier rolled his eyes at Sam's slow steps now leaned on his mop handle, his knuckles pale as his grip tightened. His gaze was fixed on the veteran, and in it was a flicker of guilt. The woman with the child looked down at her shoes, then back up at Sam with wet eyes, her son's whisper still ringing in her ears. The boy himself had gone silent, but the way he stared at Sam carried more than curiosity now. It carried awe. The bank manager, once red-faced and bellowing, now stood pale and stiff behind the counter. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words formed. His earlier authority had dissolved into something unsteady, hollow. He looked at the Admiral, then at the old man beside him, and for the first time his bluster abandoned him. He was left with only the memory of his own cruelty, replaying in the silence. Holbrook turned his body slightly, facing the room as much as he faced Sam. His voice came measured, carrying the weight of decades. "This man," he said, "was no stranger at a counter. He was the one who made sure the machines never stopped, who kept the lifeblood of war flowing when every second meant survival. He worked in the noise and the heat, where mistakes could cost more than lives. And he did it without asking for applause, without expecting thanks. He did it because it was his duty." The words struck the room like the slow toll of a bell. Every face turned toward Sam. Some eyes softened, some narrowed in shame, but none looked away. Sam himself did not move. He did not bask in the recognition, nor did he shrink from it. His grip on the folder remained firm, his cane steady beneath him. His face carried the same calm it always had. Not pride, not defiance, just the steady endurance of a man who had given his service long ago and learned never to ask for reward. The silence thickened once more. This time it was not the silence of neglect. It was the silence of acknowledgement, of understanding dawning in the hearts of those who had overlooked him. The men who mocked him could not look away. The lobby no longer belonged to the bank manager. His voice, once sharp enough to command the room, had shriveled into nothing. All eyes had shifted from him to the two men standing at the counter, Samuel Keating, cane and folder in hand, and Vice Admiral Richard Holbrook, posture straight as a mast. The atmosphere felt different now, not sterile or transactional, but reverent, as though the air itself understood it was witnessing something it would never forget. Holbrook broke the silence, his voice carrying across marble and glass without the need for volume. "From this moment forward," he said, his tone steady but unyielding, "this bank will recognize its duty. Any veteran presenting pension or service documents will not be dismissed, delayed, or denied without a supervisor's immediate review. Effective now." The words were not request but decree, spoken with the kind of authority that had once carried across decks and into storms. They landed heavy, undeniable. He reached into his pocket, withdrew a simple business card, and laid it on the counter. The emblem of the United States Navy caught the fluorescent light, a seal impossible to ignore. "If there is uncertainty," he continued, his gaze locking on the manager, "you will contact me directly. My number is there. You will not forget it." The card sat on the counter like a new rule etched in stone. The manager's lips parted, his throat dry. "Admiral, sir, he faltered, looking around for support, but found none. The tellers kept their eyes low, their hands still. The security guard, once poised to escort Sam out, now stood with his arms folded behind his back, eyes fixed forward, posture almost resembling a stance of respect. The boy near the magazine rack gripped his backpack straps tighter, his eyes shining as though he had just witnessed a legend step off the page. His mother, who had silenced him before, now let her hand rest gently on his shoulder, her own gaze fixed on Sam with something close to remorse. A teller, younger and nervous, shuffled papers until she found the missing record. She keyed the deposit into the system, her voice barely audible as she said, "It's here, sir. We'll process it immediately." Holbrook nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, then turned his eyes back to Sam. "Mr. Keating," he said, quieter now, but just as firm, "you will have what you came for, and you will not be spoken to this way again." Sam inclined his head slightly. He did not smile, nor did he soften. He simply accepted the words with the same calm that had carried him through insult, through silence, through years of being overlooked. Around the lobby, the shift was unmistakable. Customers who had once looked away now stared openly, their expressions no longer impatient, but humbled. The janitor, mop forgotten in the corner, bowed his head slightly. Even the tellers behind their glass leaned closer, their earlier whispers drowned by the weight of shame. It was not applause that filled the room, nor cheering. It was the heavier, deeper kind of recognition, the kind that does not make noise, but leaves a mark. Samuel Keating was no longer invisible, and the bank itself, once a place of dismissal, now carried the imprint of change. A week later, the same glass doors of the bank swung open, and Samuel Keating stepped inside. The morning sun glinted against the marble floor, throwing long beams across the lobby. His cane tapped out a steady rhythm, not hurried, not hesitant, but deliberate. In his other hand, he carried the same leather folder, its edges darker still with the touch of his fingers. The air smelled faintly of fresh polish, the kind applied just before opening hours. But beneath it lingered something different, respect, like the scent of old wood in a church. The routine had not changed. Sam moved at the same pace, his shoulders drawn back, his head lifted just enough to meet the world without bowing. Yet the room received him differently. No one whispered, no one muttered. A teller behind the glass glanced up at once, her eyes softening as she caught his approach. She pressed the button to open her station and stepped out, greeting him before he reached the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Keating," she said, her voice careful but warm. "We're ready for you." Sam inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words. He did not smile, not because he was ungrateful, but because his dignity was expressed in the steadiness of his presence. He set the folder gently on the counter, opening it with the same practiced care as always. The papers inside were perfectly aligned, each corner squared, each slip folded against the next. The young man who had spoken up a week earlier entered moments later. He carried no account slip, no paperwork, only a nod meant for Sam. He paused at the counter, extending his hand. Sam considered him for a breath, then took it, his grip firm despite the tremor that lingered in his knuckles. The gesture said more than thanks. It was the beginning of recognition, the start of something that might continue beyond this single room. Even the security guard, who had once stood ready to force Sam out, offered a quiet nod from his post near the door. His stance was different now, less stiff, less defensive. When their eyes met, he looked down first, a subtle acknowledgement that needed no words. Sam finished his transaction quickly, the check verified, the deposit confirmed without delay. He tucked the papers back into the folder, slid the pencil across the strap, and made his way toward the small writing desk near the entrance. There, as always, he balanced the numbers himself, each figure recorded neatly in block letters. His cane leaned against the desk, his hand steady as he wrote. The boy with the backpack reappeared, tugging his mother gently toward the desk. She hesitated at first but followed. The boy lingered just close enough for Sam to notice. Sam glanced at him once, then offered the faintest nod, the same gesture he might have given to a young recruit decades ago. The boy's chest lifted, his eyes brightening as though he had been recognized in return. When Sam rose, the lobby seemed to part for him, not out of ceremony, but out of respect. People made space without being asked. A teller held the door open without hesitation. Sam stepped through, his cane tapping once against the threshold, his folder pressed to his chest. He did not pause to look back. He did not need to. The change had already taken root. From that day on, Tuesday mornings at the bank carried a quiet ritual. Sam came, as he always had, but now he was seen. He was greeted by name, his papers processed with care, his dignity preserved in every small act of recognition. And though there were no banners, no plaques, no applause, the atmosphere itself bore witness. An ordinary place had remembered how to honor the extraordinary life of a veteran who asked for nothing more than fairness. A tradition had begun, not of celebration, but of respect, and Samuel Keating walked out, as he had walked through so many storms before, upright, steady, unflinching. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.